All right, Hobbs Middle School Civics. Last lesson, we just finished up our study of the amendments. Did we talk about every single of the 27 amendments? No. We focused on the ones really covering our civil liberties, our basic rights and freedoms. So we went through the entirety of the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, and then we touched on a handful of other amendments that impacted our civil liberties, particularly on our right to vote. So what are some of the amendments we talked about in the last lesson that increased our right to vote in America?
The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments.
Which were geared mostly towards who?
African Americans.
And what did we call those three amendments?
The Civil War Amendments.
Civil War Amendments. Sometimes you'll hear them as Reconstruction Amendments too. Our book says Civil War Amendments, but a lot of videos and other books will say Reconstruction Amendments. Reconstruction is the time period that immediately followed the Civil War where we rebuilt the United States. Cool. 13th, 14th Amendments, 14th, 15th Amendments, 13, end slavery, 14th, due process and full equal protections under the laws for African Americans and everybody else, and 15th Amendment, African American men only have the right to vote. When did we fix that men only anomaly in our voting rights? When did women get the right to vote?
1919 with the 19th Amendment.
And that's the best way to remember it. That's the way I remember it. 19th Amendment, 1919. Cool. And then we had some other amendments. We talked about the 17th. Now you get to vote for your senator directly. Important? Sure. EOC worthy? Probably not. But the other ones are pretty important. We're going to see 23rd Amendment. Do you remember what that did? It's 1961. Increased voting rights in this little itty-bitty part of the United States. Hi, I'm Washington, D.C.
I remember 26th.
26th Amendment was what?
Voting age is 18.
Huge. 26th Amendment, voting age is now 18 years old. Result of what?
The Vietnam War.
Yeah, really inspired by the Vietnam War. If I could get my leg blown off for my country, I should be able to vote for the politicians who decide it's a good idea for me to fight a war. And we missed one in there, the 24th Amendment, 1964, eliminated what?
Poll taxes.
Poll taxes. And what was a poll tax?
It was like money you had to pay to be able to vote.
You had to pay money to vote. Unfortunately, a lot of Americans be like, I don't vote anyway, so I don't care. But you'd see how that's a restriction of your civil liberties. If you didn't have the money, you didn't have the interest to protect your right by paying for it, that would be against your civil liberties. So we're going to shift. We're not talking about amendments. Now we're talking about the next big part of the Constitution, Article 1, which created our legislative branch, which is our Congress. So if you hear legislative branch, make sure you know that, yeah, Congress. I even put it on my poster because sometimes I don't think students always make this connection. Article 1 creates the legislative branch, which is our Congress. All right, so Congress, what's its major job? It does lots of stuff, Mr. Biankowski. Yes, but what is the legislative branch's primary role?
Making laws?
Making laws. That's what the word legislative means, to make laws. Cool. We learned about the legislative branch a bunch already. It was created in our Constitution in this agreement called the Great Compromise, which creates a bicameral legislative branch. Bicameral means two houses. What are the two houses in Congress?
The Senate and the House of Representatives.
Senate and House of Representatives. How many senators does each state get?
2.
2. Every state is equal in the Senate. So I'm California. I am the most populous and richest state in the United States. How many senators do I get?
2.
I'm Wyoming. There's like 3 people and a caribou here. How many senators do I get?
2.
Yeah. Everybody's equal in the Senate. Every state gets 2 senators. House of Representatives, the number of representatives is driven by the state's population. So I'm California. I have 40 million people. I get 53 representatives. I'm Wyoming. I get 1 or 2. Cool. makes laws. I like this slide here. Check it out. I like it because it compares and contrasts some things about the differences between the Senate and the House. And we'll spend most of the next couple of lessons talking about exactly that. A lot of that stuff is right there on that one slide. Cool. So if you're going to study for the EOC, that one slide will be helpful. Pretty cool building. Yeah. I just read a book over the Christmas holidays, Dawn's Early Light. It's about how the British during the War of 1812 burn up Washington, D.C. And two of the buildings they burn up are the White House, where the president lives, head of the executive branch, and they burn up Congress. Now it's all, of course, what? Marble and stuff, so the whole thing burned down, like just down to ashes? No, but they burn up the whole inside of it and pretty much trashed the place. James Madison was the president. Why do we remember James Madison? What's some trivia about James Madison?
Something about the Constitution?
He's the author of the Constitution. Yeah. Well, a lot of people were involved in the Constitutional Convention, but he gets picked as the author of the Constitution, the father of the Constitution. Any other trivia about James Madison?
I know his wife was really big on the paintings that were in it, so when the British started to burn down the place, she was like...
Yeah, poor Dolly. She was left in Washington, D.C. James Madison is really weird. He was riding around like the battlefields, like directing troops. The President of the United States.
Teeny?
Yeah. So he had to catch up with his wife later, but Dolly kind of leads the charge at the White House to get stuff moved out of there because, of course, she knew everything the British couldn't steal, they were going to burn. And she particularly wanted to save this big old portrait of who do you think?
George Washington.
George Washington. And James Madison, our shortest president, 5'4" and like 120 pounds.
You got representation.
Finally, short guys are represented. I'm a teeny bit taller than Madison, and I'm a lot heavier because he's a little skinny guy. Not that I'm ginormous, but I had about 50 pounds on poor President Madison. We eat better today. All right. Some work back the Great Compromise. The small states and the big states fought over this. The big states wanted more representatives because it just makes sense. I have more citizens. I should get more representatives. If I'm representing citizens and I have more citizens, I should get more. The little states were, of course, terrified because if you're in New Jersey or Connecticut or Delaware, you now have no political power, and it's going to be the big states, the Pennsylvanias, New Yorks, and Virginias that are going to run the entire United States. And you're like, oh man, I'm Delaware. Nobody cares about me. So the Great Compromise is we're going to take care of the small states by bicameral legislature, a Senate where everybody's equal, and a House where the big states get their due. They get representation based on population. And I think that's a very elegant way to fix that. I don't critique too many things about the Constitution, and I definitely have a hard time critiquing this Great Compromise. It seems a pretty fair way to do it. Voila! Remember, legislative branch, Congress, two houses. Two houses, bicameral, Senate and House of Representatives. This isn't the best picture, but it is kind of split, like half the building's the Senate and half the building's the House. And if, Abby, you ask me which side's which, I don't know.
Pretty sure the House is on the right.
You think? Yeah, I'm not sure. 100 senators, easy math. 50 states, 2 senators apiece. How many in the House?
2.
How many in the House of Representatives total?
435.
Yeah. 435 in the House of Representatives, ranging from states like California, which may have 55, or I think more like 53 representatives, down to places like District of Columbia, North Dakota, Alaska, which may have 1, 2, or 3 representatives.
How do they all meet in the same place? That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it would seem very overcrowded. Not everyone can.
It's a huge bloody building. Do
Yeah.
you remember when we were there a few years back? That Capitol building is massive. It's the only way I can explain it. And I don't know if you remember too, but this is the side facing the Supreme Court. On the other side of it is the mall, and it's a way long hike to the White House on the other side. But it's a massive building, and if you remember on this side of the Capitol, across the street, there's like big old office buildings? Offices for the House of Representatives in there. But the building itself is just incredibly huge too, and it's supported by other buildings that have other offices that Congress uses. But yeah,
Interesting. So they do meet in there.
they do. Yeah. So when you see things like that, yeah, that's in there. That's when they get the entire Senate and House representatives together. Looks like that. Oh, we're gonna get to this in a second. Who sits here in this chair, do you think?
The Speaker of the.
Yeah, depending on who's meeting, the Speaker of the House or the President of the Senate. Who's the President of the Senate?
I don't know.
Oh, good. We'll get to that. All right. Sometimes you'll see these graphs or charts, and you see the makeup, and you see some of the dots are blue and some of the dots are red. And what do you think that represents?
Democrat and Republican.
Yeah, the different political parties, with who usually being who?
Red is Republican, blue is Democrat.
Yeah, typically. So, a representative serves how long?
Of the Senate.
In the House of Representatives.
Oh. Forever?
The shortest term we have.
2.
2 years. Yeah. So it is kind of a bummer. If you're in the House of Representatives, literally, you're almost always coming off a campaign or getting ready to gear up for another one. If you want to keep the job. I mean, 2 years goes fast. I know in middle school, to me, 2 years took forever. But now I think back, 2 years is like, boom, gone and done. So if you're a representative, you only have a 2-year term. That happens fast, and you're almost always running for election or re-election. So each state gets representation based on its population. So you have to know the blank of the state.
Census.
The population of the state. And how do you derive population of the state?
A census.
A census. A census is a formal count of every American. We got to figure out how many Americans there are, not just for trivia. Hey, guess what? It's 2020. We have 341,273,321 Americans. Yay! Sure, it's cool to know that. But the important thing is, since you get representatives based on population, you have to know what the population is. And we do it every how many years with a census?
10.
Every 10 years. So there's one just ending up right now. I hope you participated as a good citizen. I know we did. Cool. So that implies if your state's population changes, what happens to the number of representatives you get?
It goes up.
Or?
It goes down.
Exactly. This is 2010 census. The yellow states are states that lost population and lost representatives. And the dark blue states gained population and gained representatives. So who tended to lose population, thereby losing representatives?
The more northeastern states.
The Northeast and pieces of the Midwest.
Yeah.
And who gained population?
Kind of all over. Texas, Florida.
The South in California, West Coast.
Southwest.
Yeah. So, U.S. population, and you've seen this, I've seen this over my lifetime. People are moving from here to here.
Moving generally to warmer areas.
Generally to warmer areas. It's an appeal. You may not have grown up in a place where it snowed. I grew up in a place where it snowed. And
Now
while
here you are.
I know, now I'm here. While snow looks cool, and sometimes is cool, sledding's fun. Making snowmans are fun. If you're an adult, shoveling isn't fun. Driving in it isn't fun. All right. So people have moved to the south and to the west coast. And the more important thing, though, is not just weather, it's things like jobs and industry. This used to be where all the big factories were, so it drove population. Now these factories are dying. Do people work in steel mills anymore? People work in coal mines anymore? Do people work in big car factories anymore?
No.
They moved to the south and the west coast for that better weather, and tends to be where the jobs are moving.
It's surprising that there's like no change in California. You would think as they
Yeah.
would go up, but maybe people are dying quicker because there's way more people, so
I
it stays
know.
the same.
I think you would have seen California shooting like a rocket, and maybe it just plateaued here in 2010. And I bet in 2020 it's going to be a little bit bigger. But it's expensive in California. I've seen some stuff that people are moving from California to places like Texas.
Do you think COVID is going to greatly affect the census and therefore like the amount of representatives each state gets?
Oof. Well,
Because I'm sure there was like a great population loss, but was it like that significant to each state that it'll change it?
no. Because first, it's, just so you know, because you could be watching this who knows when, it's January 2021. COVID has now killed about 350,000 Americans. That is a huge number. That's almost the amount of Americans killed during World War II. So this isn't some minor thing. 350,000 Americans. That's about 6 times the amount of people killed in the Vietnam War. That's about 120 times the amount of Americans killed in the Revolutionary War. It's about 120 times the amount of Americans killed in the global war against terror, Iraq and Afghanistan. But it's spread throughout the United States, and to gain one representative, you need a population change of about 700,000 people.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So a representative represents about 700,000 people. So, you know, Florida has had a lot of deaths, and I've seen the number, but the number for Florida is, say, 40,000 people. So that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's like a football stadium filled of dead people. Just picture that in your mind. But is that enough to change a seat in Congress? No. No. Great questions, though, and great thing to worry about. Jeez, if we don't get it under control, though, sooner or later, is it going to affect somebody's population to the point where they may lose a seat? Sure.
God
Let's hope
forbid
not.
that happens. Jeez Louise.
It could, though.
Just to double in one state?
Yeah. It's January 2021. There's 3 or 4 vaccines that are being deployed. Not very well, but those vaccines are out there. We'll get them eventually, and hopefully it shuts this COVID thing down. But Steve's prediction is January 2021. There's about 350,000 people dead today. My bet is it flatlines and kind of ends with about 500,000 dead. That's going to be my guess. And it's not going to be under control until we come back to school, August 2021. That's my bet. Hope I'm wrong, though. Here's Florida, split into its 27 districts. So Florida gets 27 representatives because of our population. The state gets split into things called districts, and each representative represents that district. So here we are. Maybe you can't see too well, but you go through the slideshow. We're green here in Northwest Florida. We are the first congressional district of Florida. So our neighbors over here would be the second. If you live there, you're in the third. Our congressman is a Republican named Matt Gaetz. So he is our congressman. He is our representative. He represents us.
Is it like that in every state,
In
split
the
into
spring.
districts per representative?
Yes.
So they have to create a whole new district if they gain a representative?
Yes. How do these districts get drawn? It's the state legislature who does it. So if Florida gains, which it may very well gain a representative, they meet in Tallahassee and they sit down with a map and they're like, we got to redraw the districts to create a 28th district. Or if you're in these northern states, they got to meet in like Harrisburg or Albany and redraw the districts to what?
So what is our district called?
The first congressional district.
That's its name?
Yeah, or you sometimes see it abbreviated as FL1, Florida District.
Do all the different districts have different names? Is it just like FL2, FL27?
You call this Florida District 2. So Florida District 1, if I remember, is all of Escambia County, Santa Rosa County, and I can't always forget these counties right off to our east.
Okaloosa?
Yeah, it's like Okaloosa, and I can't remember what the other one is. But yeah, so it's basically from the Alabama border to here.
So theoretically, we could turn into FL2 if they decided to redraw the map like that.
Probably not, because we're like smack dab in the middle of it. But, you know, say Florida lost population and we lost 700,000 people. Yeah, what might happen is Florida District 2 becomes, or Florida 1 takes up Florida 2, and then wherever 27 is, somewhere in here, that disappears, and they redraw the boundaries. Yeah, wild. And here's the worst thing. It's probably the next slide. Oh, and how do they redraw it? Each district is supposed to hold around the same number of people. So each congressman in their district represents about 750,000 people. So you draw the district to hit 750,000 people, which explains why some are big and some are tiny. If you're out here in West Florida, there's not a lot of people out here, so the district's big. But if you're in like Miami or something, you got a lot of people packed in a small area, so the district is small by area.
Yeah,
Makes
that must
sense?
be like complicated to redraw.
It is. And then they do this thing called gerrymandering a district. All right, so you're a Republican. It's 2021. Florida has grown in population. You represent, you're in Florida's state legislature in Tallahassee. You now have to redraw Florida's districts. Or you're going to redraw the districts so you create another district that's going to vote for a Democrat, or you're going to redraw the districts to draw a district that's going to vote reliably Republican.
Republican.
Exactly. So this process called gerrymandering. Here's North Carolina. It's a great picture of gerrymandering. Of course, this is the state outline, and there's not a lot of states that are complete squares. I mean, barring, Colorado. So states already look weird, right? And then they create these districts to say all the Democratic voters into these weird shaped districts. Why? So they could have more districts that are going to vote for Republicans. So for the House of Representatives of North Carolina, you're going to have more Republicans winning elections. Why? Because all the Republican voters are in these districts, and all the Democratic voters are packed into these weird shaped districts.
Are there laws against that? It seems like a manipulation of elections.
Somebody always asks this. Excellent question. So who would decide? Whose job is it to decide these huge legal questions about our government?
The Supreme Court.
Supreme Court. So some states have sued. And there's more lawsuits about gerrymandering in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court typically does this. Leave us out of it. The Supreme Court says this is a deal for states to figure out on their own.
But then the state is overrun with the people who are gerrymandering.
Yes. And the Supreme Court argues that, hey, that's not really our job. If the Constitution says states run elections, then the states should have the ability to redraw these districts. And it's not the Supreme Court's job to say, no, you got to do it in a more fair, balanced way. You don't have to agree with that, but does it make sense where the Supreme Court's coming from?
Yeah, I guess.
The Supreme Court tries to not be political. The Supreme Court has a tradition throughout our history of trying to stay out of politics. Can it do that successfully all the time? Of course not.
My question is, though, like, the Constitution, the fairness of elections, I believe, is a constitutional problem. So if there's an election going on that isn't fair.
I guess where people would argue is in your definition of fair. People would say, is this legal?
Yes.
Is it fair?
No.
No. So the argument would be, these things are legal. And the argument would be, well, clearly in North Carolina, Republicans have been winning elections, right? But the argument on the other side is, well, if you don't like this, win elections. And then if the Democrats win elections and they get a chance to redraw districts, do the Democrats then gerrymander the bejeepers out of the map to give them an advantage? Absolutely. So yeah, here's some other gerrymandered districts. These are what districts look like. So you could argue that a district, you should start out with it being what? Like a square. And you try to fit squares on a map for it to be fair. Does that happen?
This feels like so much extra work.
It is. It is a lot of hard work. Because you have to know what? You
How
have to
many
know where
people
live.
yeah.
And then what? You need to know what they're registered to vote as. So it takes some smart statisticians and geographers and people who all know all these databases to do this. But if the question is, this seems like a lot of work just to gain some political advantages, absolutely. But you gain the political advantage. And that matters over time.
It's absurd.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Gerrymandering has been happening in U.S. history for as long as the U.S. has existed, because we take it from England, where they gerrymandered their parliamentary districts too. So it's nothing new. Is it a problem? A lot of people say it's absolutely a problem. People have sued states, and the lawsuits have gone to the United States Supreme Court. In the decisions I'm aware of, the Supreme Court says, oh, please don't make us get involved in this. We're trying to stay out of politics, and this is absolute pure politics, not law. Gerrymandering. Weird word. Is it something you're going to see in the EOC? Maybe. Because if you understand how representatives are chosen and how it's based on population, you understand this idea of gerrymandering. Here's our district in a little better map. Yes. So it's, here we are. A lot of times you see this just abbreviated as FL1. Here's us. Right over here.
Pretty solid.
Yeah. Can this change? Yes. 2020, they got to redraw the district boundaries. Could that happen? Sure.
Have they done that already?
No, because the census isn't officially completed yet.
Oh.
Here's our representative, Matt Gaetz. You'll see him in the news a lot. He's big, very visible in the media. Republican. The Senate. Every state gets 2 for 100. So yeah, a little smaller number of folks. Senators serve 6 years. They have the longest term. So it's pretty good being a senator. A representative, you have a 2-year term, you get elected, you're like, whew, I made it. I got a job, 140, I forget what it is, $147,000 a year, my own parking spot. Big deal now. And you sit at your desk and you turn your computer on and you're like, oh man, I gotta start planning for my reelection. It's coming. I'm only have this job for 2 years. Senator is a little bit better than that. You're like, 6 years. I got a little time to actually do my job before I have to worry about being reelected.
Why is it like that? Why do a House of Representatives only get 2 years? Well, is it so the ideas that pertain to like the greater population stay like current? So that like, why is Senator 6 years?
It's another one I'm just gonna have to say I really can't give you a good explanation right now. I have to give you a mostly I don't know. The only way I can qualify it is, how can I explain what I know without making it too complicated? All right. We base Congress off of how Parliament was in England. In Parliament, you have 2 houses too. The House of Lords and the House of Commons. The House of Lords you get because you're basically British nobility, lords. House of Commons is like our House of Representatives. Normal people, shorter terms. Not really less power, but maybe less power. And remember, did we vote for our senators in the beginning of our country's history?
No.
No. They were picked by our state legislatures. So the framers created the Senate to be the upper house, sort of modeled on the idea of the House of Lords. And my understanding would be they probably gave them the longer term because of that history and conception of what the Senate's going to be. But I got to do some Federalist Papers reading to give you a better answer for that. That's another place I'm happy to say I really don't know. Other than saying it probably stems back to the original concept of our legislature, which was based on the English concept, which had bicameral, but with an upper house, the House of Lords, and a lower house, the House of Commons. Our House of Lords is our Senate. Our House of Commons is House of Representatives, but good. 6 years, good deal. $147,000 a year for 6 years. Can't get fired.
Good deal.
Yeah. Powerful, making big decisions. Hoorah. Here's Florida's senators, both Republicans. I think he's up for re-election in 2 years, and we just elected him in 2018, so he's got a little bit time to go. Each state gets 2 senators. They represent the entire state. So Matt Gaetz only represents Florida District 1. Senators Scott and Rubio represent the entirety of Florida. It's not like they split it in half and you say, you take half, I take half. Another good chart shows some of the basic differences between the Senate and the House. 435 in the House based on population, 100 in the Senate, 2 per state. Long term of 6 years in the Senate, short term of 2 years in the House. We'll get into this a little bit later. It's in the Constitution. You got to be 25 to become a representative. You got to be 30 to become a senator. How old do you have to be president?
35?
Yeah, 35. Good guess if you didn't know. These are opinions, but they're pretty accurate. When you have 435 people, do you think you need more rules to govern how they work? Sure. If you're a smaller group of 100, can you probably get by with a little less rules? Yeah. And you'll see that when we go into more detail on this. All right. Majority means you have the most. So the majority party is whatever party has more senators or representatives. If you are the party that has less senators or representatives, you're called the minority party. These are important because the majority party gets to pick the leadership in that House of Congress. So they're still voting for senators, but I think you're going to see, whenever you watch this video, you're going to see currently the Democrats have the majority in the House of Representatives, and the Republicans have the majority in the Senate. But it's close in the Senate, and there's some senatorial elections that are still happening because they had some close votes in Georgia in particular. So you might see that change, but I would probably guess, don't be surprised if you see a remaining Democratic majority in the House of Representatives and a Republican majority in the Senate. Cool. House leadership here. The majority party votes for their leader in the House of Representatives. That person is called the Speaker of the House. And currently that's Nancy Pelosi. With her kind of other leaders, you got a majority leader and a majority whip. The whip's a old term. We take that from, again, Parliament. The whip's job is to get all the party in line and gets the votes out for the party. So she runs the House of Representatives. He runs all the Democrats in the House of Representatives. And Representative Clyburn, he's the whip. His job is to make sure all the Democrats are in line and are doing what the leadership tells them to do. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Important thing to know about the Speaker of the House, they're third in line for the president. We need to know who's in charge of the country at all times. Who really needs to know that? Brutally, practically, the military. Why? Because they're in charge of the military. To include the authority to say, launch all the nuclear weapons at someone. So the country needs to know who's in charge, and the military definitely needs to know who's in charge. So the list is formal. So the president is the commander-in-chief of the military, the president. President keels over, who takes over?
Vice president.
Vice president. Vice president is all excited and falls out with a heart attack when he hears the news.
Speaker of the House.
Speaker of the House becomes the president. He or she is third in line to take over the leadership.
And is the next one like the Speaker of the Senate?
Yeah.
Or whatever that one's called?
You predicted that. It's going to be the president pro tempore of the Senate.
So why is the House of Representatives Speaker above the Senate Speaker? Is there like a responsibility difference where they're like more highly regarded or something?
Don't know. More things for me to Google. Don't know. I would say maybe it has something to do with this. So, how many people in the Senate?
100.
So can you have ties?
Mm-hmm.
So would you need somebody to break the tie?
Yeah.
So who breaks the ties in the Senate if there's a 50-50 vote?
The Speaker of the House?
No.
Or the President?
No.
Vice
The
President.
Vice President.
Why?
So this is kind of weird. The leader of the Senate is the Vice President. It's written in the Constitution. And it's really, the Vice President only has 2 jobs in the Constitution. We'll read about the President and the Vice President here in upcoming lessons. The President has a lot of stuff in the Constitution that the President is in charge of. The Vice President only has 2 things in there. Take over if the President keels over, and you become the President of the Senate. So you kind of run the Senate, but not really.
Only if they need you to break a tie.
Right. The real thing they need is if they ever get a 50-50 tie, the Vice President gets all excited. He or she's like, oh, I finally get to do something. Runs over to the Senate and casts that tie-breaking vote. Do you think that happens a lot?
No.
Because usually a 50-50 tie would mean you have a 50-50 split in the parties, and does that happen a lot?
So when do the House and the Senate, they don't really work together that much then? Because if the Senate has a tie, aren't they tying on like whether they are creating this law or not?
Exactly.
Well, the House of Representatives is also like, we're creating laws too.
Yes.
So I feel like if there was a tie in the Senate, shouldn't it be like, hey, let's talk to each other and like figure it out?
We'll get to that when we talk about how a bill becomes a law. The short version is the idea for a law starts as a bill. And guess what? It could start in the House of Representatives or it could start in the Senate. And how does it get from one side of Congress to the other? They vote on it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So here, they're voting on something, a bill into a law maybe,
That the House of Representatives presented.
potentially, or voting for something they came up with themselves, and the vice president breaks the tie.
Oh, and then it goes
Then
over.
it goes to the other
Okay,
house.
that makes sense.
Yeah, it's complicated, and we will cover it, maybe even the next lesson. Sure. So here's the current, as we stand here, January 2021, leadership in the Senate. Of course, Vice President Pence, he is the president of the Senate. Now, is the vice president always there and always leading the Senate? No, because he or she is the vice president too. So the other leader of the Senate is the senior-most senator, and he gets this weird Latin name called President Pro Tempore. And a guy right now, a Republican named Chuck Grassley. He is the fourth in line to take over the presidency. So the president is impeached. Who's the president now?
Vice President?
The vice president is so excited he or she has a heart attack and dies. Who's the president?
The Speaker of the House?
Speaker of the House is so excited she's running across the street to get to the White House and she gets smashed by a bus. Who's the president?
The pro tempore.
Yeah, and usually that's shortened to President Pro Tem. So you'll hear President Pro Tem almost more than you hear President Pro Tempore. And the majority leader runs the majority party in the Senate, and right now that's a Republican, Mitch McConnell.
Out of curiosity, who's the fifth in line?
So we go through those four.
Uh-huh.
It goes into the president's cabinet. The cabinet is the president's senior advisors and the people who run big chunks of government. So the senior person in the cabinet is the Secretary of State who runs foreign policy for the country. So if the fourth in line
Commits a war crime.
or is insane,
Yeah.
or says, you know what, I quit, I don't want the job. Fifth in line, it goes into the cabinet, and the senior cabinet officer is the Secretary of State. He gets run over by a taxi cab, it's Secretary of Treasury. After Secretary of Treasury, it's Secretary of Defense. After Secretary of Defense, it's Attorney General.
Do you ever think the day is gonna come where it gets down to like
Oh,
the fifth person?
well, what do you think is happening in the country if it comes down to that?
War?
Yeah. We just got nuked by North Korea or Russia. And that's why they have gone this far through it.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And there's 16 people in the cabinet, so then every year some 7th grader always asks me, well, what happens if they all get killed? Then it goes to all the assistants. So it goes back up to the Assistant Secretary of State, Assistant Secretary of Treasury. What happens if they all get killed? Then it goes into this long involved line of government officials who are now spread all throughout the United States. Because it's all boils down to, not only do we as American citizens need to know who the president is, but because the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and we probably just got, nuked by Russia, the military needs to know who the president is, because that's the only person that can give the order that says, All right, General, this is the President of the United States. I'm the Secretary of the Interior. As far as I know, I'm the only one left. Launch the nukes. And the General says, all right, everybody, launch the nukes. Full strike. Russia. Flattened into glass.
Dang.
It's pretty terrible. We have to know all of that for the EOC? No, but they usually ask the first 4 or the first 5 in the EOC. So that's great stuff that you thought about that and thought to ask about it because it is good EOC material. Get close to the end here. It's good to specialize. Particularly in the House, you have 435 people in the House of Representatives, all making laws. Great. Well, it's smart to say, if this is laws about defense, maybe we should have a committee that specializes and looks at defense issues, or transportation, or money, or taxes. So you're going to see, particularly in the House of Representatives, you get elected, you show up to the House of Representatives, hi everybody, and the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader is going to say, welcome, Congressperson Abigail from Florida District 1. Welcome to Washington, D.C. Congratulations on winning your election. Your jobs are, of course, to represent everybody who lives in Northwest Florida, but also you're now on this committee.
Do you get to choose that? Like your specialty?
You're going to try to, because what do you want to be in? The important committees.
Mm-hmm.
Not the weak committees that nobody cares about. And you try to get on a committee that is big and one that helps your voters. So if you come from Northwest Florida where there's a lot of military stuff, do you want to be on a committee that does military stuff? If you're from Kansas, do you want to get onto a committee that handles farm and agricultural stuff? Yeah. And we'll talk about that later too. What kind of committees do we have? Standing committees, which exist permanently. And then you talked about working together. House and Senate, they do. And what kind of committee do they come together in the House and Senate work together in this type of committee?
Impermanent committee?
Nope.
I don't know. Temporary?
Working together.
Conjoined.
Joint committees. Good job. So you got standing committees that exist all the time. Joint committees, which members from the House work with people from the Senate. And then temporary committees, which exist only to deal with a specific issue. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Questions?
Nope.
All right. Welcome to 2021. Have a fine Navy day.